Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another presentation by the League of Women Voters of the Northwoods. Our local league's purpose, as always, is to provide area voters with nonpartisan information to enable their support of competent local government and wise public policy. This evening, we will address a vital aspect of our community infrastructure that we would really rather ignore, namely the infrastructure that handles solid and hazardous waste. Our three speakers are shown on this slide. Meleesa Johnson, who has a string of credentials a mile long. I don't know how she has time to sleep or eat, but she's a wonderful speaker, very charismatic, very down to earth. We're so glad to have her. And Meleesa Johnson is the director of the Office of Emerging Contaminants in the Environmental Protection Division of the Wisconsin DNR. And there's me at the bottom, Dorothy Skye. I'll be moderating, and I'm also speaking for one of the segments. There's a lot we could talk about regarding local infrastructure responsible for the management of our solid and hazardous waste. In other words, everything we dump or discard. I've narrowed things down to aspects that I thought would be of greatest interest. We'll pay particular attention to PFAS, that's PFAS, which is an acronym for a huge family of ubiquitous and nearly indestructible man-made chemicals. There is increasing evidence that at least some chemicals in the PFAS family are harmful to humans. Of note, they are being detected in our groundwater, surface water, drinking water, and also in the blood of 99% of us. The closure of 2 of Rhinelander's city wells because of PFAS contamination has heightened local interest in this category of so-called emerging substances of concern. Before focusing on PFAS, however, we'll first get an update on how our local infrastructure more generally takes care of the garbage and refuse that we set out on the curb or otherwise discard. This evening's presentation is a spin-off from a recent series of webinars co-sponsored by the Wisconsin League of Women Voters and the Wisconsin section of the American Society of Civil Engineers to educate voters about the ASCE Wisconsin's 2020 Infrastructure Report Card. All of the series on those subjects is located, or you can get to it from the State League website. You just type LWVNOW in your browser, it'll get you to the website, and there's a further pathway to them once you get to that website, and that is written in the chat. Mention that the chat reminds me to review how to navigate your Zoom meeting screen. Audience members should mute until the Q&A period, but meanwhile, you can type your questions and comments in the chat, and I'm pointing right here with my cursor where the chat is at the bottom of your screen. I recommend that you go up here to view in the right-hand corner and check speaker so that you're on your speaker's view. If you want to ask questions during the Q&A but can't figure out the chat function, you'll be able to just physically raise your hand and we'll call on you and unmute you. This meeting is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the Northwoods League's YouTube channel, and the pathway to that is also in the chat. So before we begin tonight, folks, I must pause regretfully to announce the sudden and unexpected death of one of the founding members of the League of Women Voters of the Northwoods, Karen Kitsey. It was just last week that Karen was involved in planning out tonight's program and other activities of our program committee. Karen was a beloved wife and mother and grandmother and a favorite teacher at Rhinelander High School. We send condolences to her family, and Karen, we will respectfully pause a moment before we carry on, inspired by your spirit. To set the stage for our first speaker, I'm sure you're aware that the things have gotten more complicated since the good old days when we just poured our noxious wastes down the drain or dumped them in the woods. To update us on solid waste disposal and recycling in general, and the PFAS implications for landfills in particular, we're joined by Meleesa Johnson. Meleesa is the manager of the Marathon County Landfill, and a woman whose many public service endeavors, as I said earlier, must leave her little time to sleep or eat. And I hope you have enough energy today. Please inform us, Meleesa.
Well, I do eat and sleep, and I really enjoy baking and cooking. So yeah, sometimes I eat a little too much, but the other thing is I've got a pretty good wine selection. I have a friend who is a distributor, so that also helps in the whole process. So anyway, thank you very much. It is an absolute pleasure to be with all of you. If you ask anyone who knows me, they will tell you that I love talking about garbage. And I am so thrilled to be working in this industry. I'll tell you a story in a little bit when I show the photo, but this is an incredible industry filled with wonderful people who every day come to work to protect human health and the environment. That is all we do. When we take in garbage, we are entirely and completely focused on those two things. So what an honor to be a part of that. It's also an honor to be invited by your group. I'm a league member, have been for a long time. And someone had asked recently about one of my most, one of my league events that left the biggest impression on me, and it was a state meeting. And at the luncheon, I got to sit next to Shirley Abrahamson. I was still a college student. I was 44 years old. I was a non-traditional student, but here I am sort of emerging into this new life, going from, a high school dropout, now college. And I was given a gift actually of a league membership. And here I'm sitting next to the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. So I have great fondness for the league and all of your work. And again, it's always an honor to be with you. So I will share my presentation, get it up on the screen here and get it in. There we go. So I do like to do a little tongue in cheek, and the magical world of solid waste management made me think about Walt Disney and all the fireworks going off and the magical world of Disney. For me, really, it is a magical world. What we do every day with the stuff you don't want, we make it look like magic. And so hence the magical world of solid waste management. Here's my information. I'm always pleased to get emails and or phone calls. Please feel free after the presentation. You're thinking of something, you miss something, or you wanted to just double check, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm very happy to always answer those questions. Or if I don't have the answer, I know someone who does. So please, please feel free to reach out. Just a little bit, the Marathon County Solid Waste Department has been around since 1980. We have 3 landfills on our property, but we not only do landfill work, but we're a community resource. We provide a wide range of community programs, from recycling education to recycling, a collection of everything from tires to scrap metal to waste oil. We have a hazardous waste program. I do tons and tons of environmental consulting with my municipalities. and with private sector business. In fact, I was on the phone with Wausau Tile this afternoon. They want me to come back in and reevaluate their recycling program. And again, our mission, as you can see, I won't read that, but again, it gets down to protecting human health and the environment. And that's not our mission. Every solid waste facility is going to have that mission. Key component about the Marathon County Solid Waste and other solid waste departments that are municipally owned, we use no tax dollars. We are an enterprise within county government, and we charge for the services we provide. We do not bond for our construction projects or for the purchase of our equipment. We put our earnings aside to do all of that, and then also invest in our community programs, like the community Dropbox program for pharmaceuticals and our compost bin program. Going back, as Dorothy said, you know, it used to be, where did the garbage go? When I was growing up in Junction City, which is here in Portage County, I was thrilled when I became old enough to take the garbage to the burning barrel. It was like a rite of passage. And I was trusted with a box of matches and crumpled up paper and started the burning barrel. And that burning barrel, along with our neighbors, everybody in the neighborhood, they would burn and burn and burn. And then we'd have this wonderful layer of smog floating across Junction City. Of course, there was a town dump in Junction City, which was just over the railroad tracks in that useless bit of wetland that nobody could possibly farm, and yeah, couldn't build there. So what went there but the dump? And the dump also would smolder for most of the week because you brought your garbage there, and then Mr. Tessmer would take a tire at the end of the week, start that puppy up, and then the garbage would smolder for the rest of the week. And of course, you know, we've all seen scenes like this. Many of you probably remember the stories of Love Canal and the very basis for our CERCLA and RCRA laws that we have now related to solid waste management, end of life care of our garbage. We don't do that anymore, thankfully. But though that's what led to many of the laws that I use every day to build and manage landfills and recycling programs. Here is a photo, and I share this photo to give you an idea of the implications of what we do if we don't manage our garbage. You know, I do tons of presentation, and every presentation, this is what I get asked. Why do we have to have landfills? They're stinky. Why do you have to make such big landfills? And I'm like, I don't know. I see that you're clothed today, and you probably washed your hair, and maybe you ate today, and you decided to buy some stuff from Amazon or whatever. But all along that supply chain, waste was produced. There is no such thing as zero waste. And so we need to figure out ways to manage it. And when we don't, this is what happened. This is Beirut, Lebanon. About 10 years ago, they had an issue where they couldn't figure out where to build a landfill. And nobody wanted it in their backyard. And voila, the garbage, they didn't stop producing garbage, but they had to get rid of it. So they literally lined city streets and beaches and fields with garbage bags because there was no place to send them. And I ran into some women from Beirut, Lebanon, in an airport in Atlanta, in the airport, Hartsfield-Jackson. And we were waiting to catch flights, and we started chatting, and the women said they were here in the States to expand their business. And they asked me what I did, and I said, well, I'm a solid waste management professional. And the one woman grabbed my arm and she said, oh, you must come to Lebanon and solve our problems. We have garbage everywhere and they can't make decisions. And I kind of looked at her and I said, well, ma'am, you know, certainly garbage is the least of your concerns. You have the Israeli Defense Forces from the south encroaching upon your territory. You have Hezbollah as a terrorist group. You've got Syria trying to invade your country from time to time, and ISIS. And the woman goes, oh no, you don't understand. That's politics. If you don't manage the garbage every single day, that affects everybody every single day. And it was at that moment that I finally realized I love what I do. I always have. But I realized what we do, my colleagues and I, is a very noble profession. And it is the essence of what we have in our modern society. Imagine if we did not have that, we could not be an advanced society. So how do we do it? There's a lot of different mechanisms that go into it. And Dorothy had asked me to talk about landfills. And this is a very fundamental diagram. I use this when I lecture at the university in the introductory natural resources classes. And whenever I'm out in the community, it basically gives us the information that we need to know. We need to know this is a hole in the ground. That's what landfills are. And that we have a series of environmental systems that help protect the garbage from the environment. So in other words, the groundwater and the land around it. The primary mechanism by which we do that is the liner system. And the liner system consists of 4 feet of compacted clay. And this is for a subtitle D landfill, your modern solid waste landfill. It's 4 feet of clay compacted in 6-inch lifts. And of course, clay is, once it's compacted, is very impervious. It will hold water in. On top of that, and I'll show you some photos in a minute, is the liner system. And that is a 60 mil liner. It's a plastic, sheets of plastic layered, connected one to the other across the entire surface of the landfill and the entire slope. Within that is laid leachate collection lines, and leachate is all of the liquid that accumulates at the bottom of your landfill. And that can be from precipitation, but it is also from all the gooey, icky garbage that we throw out. All of that percolates down, and as you can see, the leachate collection system at the bottom of the landfill, that it has filtered or perforated pipes, which collects all of that liquid. There is a force main or pumps that send that liquid out to a holding station, and then all of that sent out to a wastewater treatment facility for treatment. You'll see there's a separation from groundwater, and this isn't the best illustration, but in Wisconsin, the law says that we have to be within 10 feet, the base of the landfill, even the sump at the base of the landfill, so all of those piping system have to be within 10 feet of the high groundwater point. So even before we dig the hole, we have to do copious amounts of monitoring of the groundwater elevations. So separation from groundwater is 10 feet unless you get an exemption. And then if you get an exemption, you may have to do additional monitoring or have an additional liner system. And then of course, all you do is just start layering waste. The waste comes in, the compactor comes in and runs it over, compacts it in place. We cover it with cover soils or alternative daily cover. And that keeps the odors under control, and it keeps pests out. And then of course, once it starts producing methane, which is fairly quickly, we start putting in a gas collection system. And the gas collection system, while it is not perfect, it is the system that we have the efficiencies of collecting not only methane, but other volatile organic compounds, is in the 75 to 82% efficiency. So over the life of the landfill, it will capture 75 to 82% of the methane produced and take it and combust it to convert methane, a more egregious greenhouse gas, and it converts it to carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, depending upon the efficiency of the combustion unit. So it's really fairly uncomplicated. It's kind of like building a lasagna. Sorry, I like to cook, so I do relate things back to food. It is like building a lasagna. It is designed to keep the waste in these pocket layers or pockets. We cover them. When it's all filled up, then we do the reverse of that liner system. We put a liner on top, and then we monitor it. In Wisconsin, we have 40 years of requirements to continue to monitor that landfill. And for Marathon County, we currently have close to $20 million in cash that we have for the monitoring of our 3 landfills over their life of their long-term care. So just some construction photos, because I love construction. We start digging a hole. It's pretty not that complicated. Big pieces of equipment come in and we start excavating the soils. The area where you see this little skid steer, this is all compacted clay. As you can see, it has a different coloration from the first one. That's all of the clay that's been compacted in place. And what you see now with this piece of equipment in the foreground and on this roller, they are starting to roll out that geomembrane. Now, before they can even do that, there is a line of people, and it reminds me of being at my grandparents' farm in Unity, where we would walk in a line to pick rocks out of the field before Grandpa would plow. And so they actually create a line, we walk through and pick up all of the rocks that have the potential to fracture that liner. So that clay is compacted in place. We pull out any rocks that have the potential to damage the liner. The liner crew comes in, lays this, where you can see this in the trench where that liner is already. And as this new piece of liner is being deployed, those edges will be welded. They will be fused in place and then tested repeatedly to ensure that those welds will withstand not only the pressure of the weight of the landfill, the garbage, but also the hydraulic pressure of the liquids that are going to accumulate at the bottom of that landfill. And here's just an example of the trucks coming in with the stone that serves as the drainage layer at the bottom of the landfill. It helps slow down the percolation of the liquids so that it can accumulate appropriately without overflowing into those perforated pipes at the bottom of the landfill called leachate pipes. Here's an example of the leachate pipes laying in the trench, getting ready to be buried by the drainage layer. And this rock is very specific. You cannot have any calcium containing rock in your drainage layer, 0. So it has to be very specific. It has to be washed. There can't be any dust or debris in it. It's very expensive to get the exact specifications. And again, the leachate is pumped out of the landfill. It goes to a storage tank. And as I said, it goes to a wastewater treatment facility for primary, secondary, and tertiary treatment before being sent into a waterway. And the ultimate goal is that first placement of waste. This was our phase 3 and 4. That's 2 of my team members there, standing curiously looking at the garbage as if they've never seen garbage before in their lives. But that's the first load of garbage going into the landfill. And that's the basic construction of a landfill. It's not all that complicated. The construction is actually prescribed. It's very straightforward. Here's the thing that is not straightforward. We have no idea what you're going to put in your garbage. You can put literally anything you want in your garbage. Households are exempt from all of the hazardous waste rules, all of the medical waste rules. So if you're cleaning out the shed and oh my gosh, you found this old stuff and it has a skull and crossbones on it. You don't know what it is, but it could be DDT. It could be something else. Who knows? You can throw that in your garbage. There is no law that prohibits it. Households are exempt from all of those rules, which is why because we take in high volume industrial waste from paper mills and anodizing facilities, metal plating facilities. I know exactly what's in that garbage. I know exactly what's in the debris coming from those high volume sources because it has to be characterized. I have the lab data. I know the particulate size of the material. I know exactly what VOCs are in there. I know exactly what metal content is. I do not know what's coming in those household loads, and that is the bulk of our waste. So we are basically managing a mystery. We haven't a clue what's coming in, but we do our best to use the rules to ensure that even though we don't know what's coming in, we do know how to take care of it the best way possible. And a little bit about the phases of a landfill. There at first, when the garbage goes in, there's not a lot of, you know, a modern solid waste landfill is an anaerobic vessel. There is not supposed to be oxygen in the landfill during the methanogenic process. But as we first put garbage in, there's still a fair amount of oxygen in the waste mass. Now, that is why we compact it, and that is why we cover it up, because the whole goal of a Subtitle D landfill, and when I say Subtitle D, that's the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. Subtitle D is the provision for solid waste landfills, municipal solid waste landfills. Phase 1 is really, you got a lot of new garbage, and it'll smell like garbage. You get a lot of, it is a distinct garbage smell. You still have a lot of oxygen. Phase 2, you're starting to see a decline in oxygen, and you're starting to see an incline in carbon dioxide as we're starting to get some heat in the process. In our solid waste landfills, our air permits, which are guided under the Clean Air Act, we have to keep our gas wells, which are monitored on a monthly basis. They have to be below or in a range of about 130 to 138 degrees. And that's the prime temperature for maximum methanogenic activity, so decomposition in an anaerobic state. So you start to see those curves start changing as the waste gets older. It becomes less and less oxygenated. And here's the thing is, you don't want a lot of oxygen in an old landfill, because what will happen if you have a lot of oxygen coming in quickly and you have those temperatures, 138 degrees, sometimes up to 150 degrees, and you have the right kind of materials in there, let's say lithium ion batteries, aluminum dross, the debris from aluminum anodizing facility, very reactive with the right set of temperatures and the right set of oxygen. Now you have an oxygenation event or a fire, and you do not want that. And those can be very deep within a landfill. So you manage that, you try to squish out all of that oxygen, you go into phase 3, you have this sort of fluctuation. You can have gas wells indicating for 60% methane, some of them will be at 30%, and you'll see your gas curves all over the place. But ultimately, it all kind of evens out during this process. How long is this process? Some things decompose very quickly. Other things, it is a much longer process. Our gas curves that we have, and you can find them on EPA's website for my department, are stretched out over 80 years. But after 80 years, you start seeing, or even after 20 years, you start seeing a significant decline in the methane composition. And just a little bit on what happens with the methane that's collected, or the landfill gas. A lot of facilities across the state of Wisconsin, across the United States, are using the methane to produce some type of energy. We have gas wells, as you saw from the very simplistic diagram. Those are tied to a header system with a blower that sucks out the gas from the landfill, sends it to a processing facility where it'll either be used to run engines to produce electricity. It could be used and cleaned to produce compressed natural gas, or it can be used and cleaned and sent into the natural gas pipeline and used as renewable natural gas, which is the growing trend. So that's landfills, and there's a whole bunch more. I teach a semester-long class on solid waste, so I could be here all night. But I won't do that to you. But that's the basics and the things that we deal with on a daily basis. So literally the 3 words I hate to hear. I go to presentations and everybody sits there a little uncomfortably and they all want to raise their hands. We recycle everything at our house. And I want to take, just a stick and maybe just hit them a little bit and say, please don't do that. Please don't do that. There's a thing that we in the industry that we call wish cycling, and it's kind of the way we've given ourselves permission to consume. And this is an example. Years ago, I was waiting for my granddaughter to come out of her classroom, and I was talking to the woman next to me, and she was coming to pick up her son, and I knew they only lived 2 blocks away, 2 or 3 blocks. And it was a cold winter day, so let's give her that. And I said, well, where are you going? And she goes, oh, we're just going home. And I said, I saw you drive up in your Hummer. I thought maybe you were going someplace. And she goes, no, I just came over to pick up the boys. But then she turns around when we got started talking about garbage. She goes, well, we recycle everything at our house. And I said, well, that's nice, but you drove 2 blocks to pick up your kids from school and you could have walked, but you somehow feel justified in doing that because you recycle everything. The first of the 3 R's is not recycle. It is reduce, and we always forget that. Recycle has been the low-hanging fruit, and it is what has given us permission to consume. The plastics industry is all excited about its little chasing arrows. It means nothing. The paper industry encourages us to produce, print all of those things, buy more stuff from Amazon. We're definitely going to need more cardboard boxes. Recycling has given us permission to consume. Recycling is not a waste reduction strategy. It simply delays the disposal of those materials. Most paper products can only be recycled 5 to 7 times before that fiber is too small and it cannot be used again. Plastic in the recycling system, maybe 3 to 5 times. So there is not an indefinite length at which we can recycle things, except for aluminum. Aluminum is recyclable into perpetuity. So when we want to put everything in the recycling bin because it makes us feel good, it actually hampers our ability in Wisconsin and across this nation to run effective recycling programs. And so my colleagues and I are trying to get everybody back to the basics. And here's what you see are the basics of recycling. These are the things that are banned from landfills and have been a part of the recycling program for decades. It's just when we get into these complex plastics and these complex paper products, or we have this toy that we're sure can be recycled somewhere, those don't go in the recycling bin. And the markets for recyclables have been more and more challenged over the last decade. So when we don't recycle correctly, then we actually make recycling less sustainable. So if you're ever uncertain about what to recycle, you should always check with your local program to see what they're taking. But I can tell you every single program in Wisconsin will take these items, regardless of your program. This you can do. And if you do it right, you will be helping to create a more sustainable recycling system in Wisconsin. PFAS, my favorite topic. So part of my professional role, I am on the DNR's PFAS Policy Advisory Group. I'm a co-founder of a group called the Solid Waste PFAS Group. I dream about PFAS. I have actually dreamt about PFAS. And actually I was reading a mystery novel set in Venice, Italy, and I loved the author, and I picked it up and I opened the first page, and it was about the illegal dumping of PFAS in the lagoons in Venice. So my getaway, which is a mystery book novel, it was a murder mystery, all of a sudden PFAS are popping up. And I closed it and I said, you know what? I am not reading this book. I deal with PFAS every day. So the cycle of PFAS, and of course, this is in our lives. This is very sensational. And for those of you in the Rhinelander area, of course, very sensitive. And I'm not trying to dismiss the concerns. I'm not trying to be flippant. I am just what I'm trying to share here is what we deal with from a solid waste perspective. I remember going to some of the first meetings on PFAS, and there was a lot of finger pointing at landfills because they were like, well, landfills are sources of PFAS. And I'm like, well, no, we don't produce them. But remember that slide of the witch's brew? What we do get is all the stuff from your household. And could we be getting it from those high volume industrial sources? Absolutely. But a little later on in my PFAS journey, I listened to a woman from the Department of Health Services talk about the fact that the number one source of exposure, pathway for exposure for adults, was the food we eat. And the number one pathway for exposure for children was the dust in their homes. And I soon came, yeah.
You're making a nice transition to the general landfill stuff to the PFAS. We want to be sure to give Mimi a chance to give her part because she's got to leave at 6:30.
Oh, that's right. Thank you. Thanks for, see, I told you I could go on and on.
Yeah. So how about if you stop there? We'll turn it over to Mimi, and then you and I can pick it up afterwards.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Our next speaker is Meleesa Johnson. Mimi's the director of the Office of Emerging Contaminants, which is in the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources Environmental Management Division. The Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources has been assigned a significant role when it comes to testing and mitigation of PFAS. That's stuff that's seeping into everything, including the landfills from multiple sources. Mimi will give us an update on those DNR activities and make us aware of recommendations from the Wisconsin PFAS Action Committee. So Mimi will help us get up to speed on PFAS. And by the way, Mimi has to leave at 6:30, as I said, for another meeting. So we will have the Q&A for her segment, or just questions for Mimi, right after she's done speaking. Then we'll have another Q&A at the end for Meleesa Johnson and myself. So Mimi, would you like to share your screen and fill us in?
Let me know if you can see that all right.
We got it, Mimi.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to join the conversation tonight. And my work with the League dates back when I was in high school. I was organizing and co-hosting voting forums for local elections, such as school board in my hometown of Wisconsin. And then with the National League when I was working for an environmental nonprofit. So I also have a fond appreciation for and history with the League and the work that you all do. So I'm going to walk through a handful of slides kind of on the background of PFAS. Some of you may have heard some of this before, but as we know, it takes about 7 times for messages to really resonate. And that's just about the time with PFAS that we learn something new or maybe something conflicting about it. So bear with me and know that this information is often being updated as we all get more science and learn more about how PFAS is behaving in our community. So PFAS, they're a group of human-made chemicals that we've been using for decades in a variety of products. They're not breaking down in the environment. They've been discovered at concentrations of concern in groundwater, surface water, and drinking water. And some of the many products that contain PFAS that have been attributed to contamination that we're sending over to the landfills are stain-resistant carpeting and fabric, like waterproof jackets or non-iron shirts, non-stick cookware, like our Teflon-coated pans, firefighting foam, specifically Class B, which is used for certain types of fire, as well as fast food packaging, and so on. And at their peak production, PFOA and PFOS, which are sort of the most famous PFAS, that was between 1970 and the early 2000s. And then there was voluntary reduction of PFOA and PFOS in the US, as well as throughout Europe, Japan, and a handful of other countries. But we still have PFOA and PFOS showing up, both as imports, but also as precursors. And now we're starting to learn more and more about those replacement products and newer PFAS that are being used as replacements for the PFOA and PFOS. So Meleesa was just kind of walking through the same graphic. We all love this graphic in the PFAS world because it really simplifies kind of where it's showing up, how it's showing up. And we know that it's coming from industrial and commercial facilities, from military bases, airports, fire stations, or anywhere that might be using that AFFF firefighting foam, through waste products, including leachate from landfills, and from biosolids and effluent from wastewater treatment plants. As I said, we're still learning every day about how they are transporting through the environment. And sometimes we're baffled by how it's maybe showing up and what's showing up in certain areas and not in others. So why are we concerned about this? These are just a handful of the reasons we're tracking PFAS. The health impacts I'm going to speak to in just a minute, but this is a widespread contaminant. It's mobile, it's toxic. In terms of environmental standards, it's more that there's a lack thereof. This is really a space that I'll speak to in just a couple slides, where we don't have federal standards at this point. And then just resources to address it. This can be really complicated, especially if we don't have responsible parties or known sources. It can be very difficult. Sometimes, like the case of landfills, we might be inheriting problems that we may not know about until it becomes even more serious. So here's just a quick summary of some of the health implications that we know of, and we work in partnership with the State Department of Health Services to understand the impact of PFAS on our health. What we know is that PFAS can persist in the environment and the human body for very long periods of time. Scientific and peer-reviewed literature and resources from national and international bodies have found just some of the harmful effects on people's exposure to certain PFAS might include certain kinds of cancer, thyroid and heart issues, infertility and low birth weight, as well as developmental delays. So I'm going to now walk through a couple of maps of where PFAS is found in Wisconsin. And as a reminder, these are just some of the sources that we know of in the state where we found contamination. So this is a map. This is the oldest map I could find in the series that we've been updating. This dates back to November of 2019, just to show some of the scattering of sites across the state. And then I'm going to show you, this is the current map from just last week of known locations. And this is side by side. So you'll see in just under 2 years, there have been quite a handful of new sites that have popped up. And some kind of clusters of sites where we've learned more. So we have about 35 active PFAS sites in Wisconsin. We know there's more PFAS out there, but we're working to understand it as best we can and with the authority we have to understand it. We are also tracking closely across other states as they're investigating and have the resources to go out and look for PFAS. At state-owned closed landfills in Minnesota, they found pretty significant PFAS contamination or spread of contamination across those sites. Michigan has recently been testing all of their airports across the state, and so far all have been finding PFAS contamination. And similarly, across states that have been able to do statewide public water system sampling, about 5 to 10% of public water system suppliers have had PFAS at levels exceeding health standards. So again, this all gets back to sampling and just a couple of other sampling activities we've been able to do in the state so far. We've sampled more than 100 water bodies for PFAS and surface water and 55 water bodies for PFAS contamination. This helped us add some dots to that map. We've sampled 91 municipal water systems in Wisconsin, and only about 5 of those systems have exceeded recommended health levels. We are just gearing up to embark on a project to sample about 90 more systems. And again, most of our Midwestern neighbors at this point have had the resources to go out and do sampling of all of their public water systems. We also are, as an agency with a mission to protect our state's natural resources, this includes protecting our fish and wildlife. So over the past couple of years, Wisconsin's actually been a leader in sampling fish and wildlife for PFAS. We've sampled deer, we've sampled eaglets, waterfowl, and quite a few species of fish for PFAS. And the sample results are then shared with the Department of Health Services, and we work with their toxicologists and biologists at the DNR to review and determine the human health impact of consumption and whether it warrants PFAS consumption advisories. And as a result of these sampling efforts, we've had about 17 fish consumption advisories issued. This includes the first ever US issued advisory in a Great Lake for smelt in Lake Superior, as well as the first inland trout advisory. And we just recently, I think within the last week or two, released our results from deer sampling from more than 30 counties in 2020. And what we found through that was that the PFAS levels were either low or non-detect throughout the entire state. So at this time, it doesn't warrant a statewide advisory. So that's the kind of sampling effort that we hope to do more of as we share that data with our neighbors in Minnesota, Michigan, across the border in Ontario, and try to really understand what background and ambient levels of PFAS might be versus where there might be source-related contamination. So just a handful of things that we are working on. As Dorothy mentioned, we have the PFAS Action Plan, and this is the product of our Coordinating Council of State Agencies. About 17 agencies worked together to release a blueprint for action last December. This action plan calls out about 25 recommended actions from research coordination and really being able to understand how PFAS behaves in Wisconsin environments, but also sampling, again, really working to better understand where this is showing up across the state, building out stronger risk communication infrastructure, and really investing in product stewardship. It also included a handful of guiding principles, looking at environmental justice and health equity, but really also focusing on innovation and pollution prevention and supporting our businesses across the state so that we can help find some solutions together. The plan helped inform some of the governor's $23 million PFAS-related budget initiatives and also has been included in some of the updates to the CLEAR Act that's currently sitting in the Wisconsin legislature. One of the other key components of the action plan really is standard setting, and that's work that is already underway at the DNR and the Department of Health Services. PFAS aren't really regulated by the federal government at this time. It's not a hazardous substance or waste, and all of that is very controversial in terms of the kind of definitions and parameters we put on it. There's some federal guidance, but there's not a lot of enforceable rules and regulations that we can lean on as states. There are currently groundwater, surface water, drinking water standards in our rulemaking process in the state, both for those older PFOA and PFOS, but also for 14 additional compounds. And prior to this current effort, it had been about 10 years since we last worked through the standard setting process. And, you know, as I mentioned, just in the last 2 years, we've gotten a whole bunch of new sites, and this is an area that we're always learning more. So 10 years is really a long time to go without standard setting. And this is just a graphic that the Department of Health Services uses to help walk us through the process that we work in coordination with the Department of Health Services. We, as the Department of Natural Resources, ask the Department of Health Services to review the substances that we think require some analysis in terms of human health impact. They then work through the science over a period of time, come back to us with the standards that they think we should be setting, and then we work through the rulemaking process. So one of the other things that we're really working actively alongside communities as they navigate PFAS contamination, and this might include information sharing through listening sessions and town halls, through listservs and web pages that are updated specific to the communities. We've also been able to leverage our authority and our resources to help with sampling efforts. We both provide technical assistance to local utilities as they're sampling and working to understand results from public water systems. But we also work with private well owners and communities to help coordinate sampling and analysis, and in some cases, like in French Island, issue health advisories. We also work to manage site investigations. Of those 35 sites I mentioned, you know, we're working actively with, if there's a responsible party, we're working with them, we're working with communities and their environmental consultants to really better understand how PFAS is showing up and behaving in that environment. And we also are getting more involved with PFAS as it relates to permitting. And that's something that I think is still emerging. And at this point, you know, the permitting processes are very iterative. And so as we learn more and have more data and sampling results, both from our state, but from other states, we're working to incorporate that. It also means that we're working to help support specific communities like the firefighting community in the state. We've worked in partnership with our Fire Chiefs Association and others to develop resources and gain a better understanding of where PFAS containing firefighting foam is. And this helped inform some of the work with the state law that's prohibiting the use of firefighting foam. And we're also awaiting our Joint Finance Committee in the legislature to approve the 1310 request, which will release the funds that were allocated to us in the budget for a collection and disposal program. And this program will help communities get rid of the PFAS containing firefighting foams in a safe manner so that they don't end up being dispensed into the environment or in landfills. We are also, some of the pieces that we are also working through that I've mentioned throughout, really is the sampling and understanding where PFAS is. We have very minimal resources dedicated at the state level to PFAS. And this is a very resource intensive process. Once we find a contaminated site, it might take a series of steps. As I mentioned, hiring an environmental consultant to investigate, investigating groundwater, soil, sediment, surface water, groundwater, sampling public and private drinking wells, providing emergency water to the public, developing and implementing a cleanup plan, disposing of that contaminated leachate or contaminated biosolids, replacing municipal wells, adding treatment to municipal wells. All of this is very resource intensive, whether it falls to us at the state or to a private resident with a contaminated well. It's very, very costly, which I think, as we've mentioned, Meleesa and I in other conversations, sometimes people aren't as interested in sampling or asking the questions because the answers are either unknown or very hard to work through. So, a couple of the key pieces that we're watching and really supportive of are efforts to obviously invest more in sampling so that we can have a better understanding at the state level of where this is and to help us build our capacity to support communities. This also includes community grants and community resources. Communities, whether it be utilities, landfills, residents, anyone who's drinking the water, there's a need for resources to really navigate the contamination and really work towards containing, mitigating, and ultimately, we can be working to prevent as well. So there's a handful of legislative opportunities out there right now too, that we're tracking closely and helping provide input as subject matter experts as appropriate. There's comprehensive legislation in the state, as well as at the federal level, that's really working to, to bring together both sides and really work to set standards to explore some of our next steps in terms of regulating as a class or designating as a hazardous substance, and to work to get the necessary resources back to communities and utilities and others. So I think we're busy. We're working to understand this. We're working to support and provide technical assistance as best we can, and to find the solutions for communities that are going to be, most helpful, most cost effective, and really, navigating a very difficult topic, and ensure that our community is as clean and our water as safe as possible. That's what I've got, Dorothy.
Mimi, you have done it. You have done a fabulous job. Well, I don't know if you had that slide set on the shelf or if you worked for 100 hours to build it, or somebody did sometime, but you have hit the essentials there, and it's just blending in perfectly with what Meleesa has said and what I intend to say. Now, I know you got another meeting to go to. You said you have to leave about 6:30. Do you have to leave now, or can you stay for a few minutes?
I can stand for a few minutes. Yeah, I can stand for a few minutes.
Okay, well, we'll see if there's, let me check the chat here. I don't know if you can see this, the chat, Mimi, but there's questions about agricultural products, dairy, what the effect on dairy farms and milk and stuff, and wondering about our coordination between Wisconsin, Michigan, and Minnesota Department of Health Services and Natural Resources. You want to comment on those two things, and then we'll let you go.
Yeah, so dairy, that's definitely a space that is of great interest in Wisconsin, obviously, and cows require quite a bit of water in order to produce milk. So it's all linked. Even at this point, we're working closely with DATCAP. They're a member of WISPAC. There has not been much sampling of the dairy community in Wisconsin to date. Even nationally, there has not been a lot of sampling or work in the dairy space. Maine has done probably the most, and Connecticut has done a bit as well, but they have far fewer dairy farms than we do here in Wisconsin. I think it's a space that we're hoping to learn more about, and even in the case of deer, as we've tried to understand how PFAS, the uptake and bioaccumulation in deer, to maybe learn from that. We still have not really seen any solid lessons at this point, but I think stay tuned. There will probably be more to come with dairy. As it relates to the Department of Health and our counterparts in other states, we have built an infrastructure across the Great Lakes regions where we convene monthly with kind of program leads who are working on PFAS at the various departments, and share our research and our learnings and our navigation of policy and all of that. So I would say there's very strong coordination. We all have very different rulemaking and standard setting authorities and processes, which I think we get very envious of some of our partners who have both more ability to set health-based standards and act, but also have gotten a lot more resources. They are, both Michigan and Minnesota have very significant contamination in a couple of centralized areas, and so they've been able to get funds to help support their work. And I think, we try to learn from them as much as we can. And they likewise are learning from us. I think as we did our smelt advisory, it sent a ripple effect across the Great Lakes, and every other state ended up testing smelt in their water bodies as well. And we're, comparing notes, and we share water and resources, and want to make sure that we're being good stewards of those resources with one another.
All right, excellent. With many thanks, we will let you go. But
Thank you.
We know you're out there. And Mimi, if there's anything that the League of Women Voters of the Northwoods or the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin can do to support you in these efforts, you've got my contact information. Feel free to use it. This is going to be going on for quite some time, but we've got to stick with it and stick on it. And thank you so much for the work you do and for your excellent presentation. And now we'll let you get going to make it to the PTO meeting, because
thank you.
Bye-bye, and there goes another very busy woman.
Great, thank you. Have a great night, and thank you again for having me.
All right,
I'm happy to come back and speak as needed. Great, thank you. Bye.
We'll take you up on that. All righty. That leaves me in the cleanup position. But actually, I'm going to share some more dirt with you about PFAS. Pardon the pun. And some of the stuff that I was going to talk about, Meleesa and Mimi have gone over, but they did not steal all my thunder or ruin all my stories. So I'm going to screen share. Got to push all the buttons and go on presentation mode. Can everybody see that? We got it going. All right. So while the fuss about PFAS, the answer is a real life cautionary tale that I'm going to share with you. The story revolves around a huge family of organic compounds that go by the acronym PFAS, P-F-A-S. And we've been blithely unaware until recently that we are exposed to these chemical compounds every day. Alas, strong evidence has emerged that at least some of these substances are harmful to our health. And I'm going to tell you the moral to my story right up front. We should not produce and distribute novel chemical creations, no matter how wondrous they seem, until we know how to safely and practically dispose of them. Oh well. In 1938, Roy Plunkett, a DuPont research chemist, was working with tetrafluoroethylene gas and accidentally made Teflon, a waxy solid with amazing properties such as low surface friction, high heat resistance, and resistance to corrosion. In 1951, DuPont company started making Teflon from PFOA, the most famous and infamous PFAS. Teflon found so many uses that it became a term in common English, just like Kleenex. Also in the early 1950s, a close relative of PFOA, PFOS, was discovered when a couple of 3M chemists, one of them spilled this substance on a tennis shoe and noticed that it created a coating that repelled both oil and water. And Scotchgard was invented. And we put it on our clothing and on our upholstery and our carpets. There you go. Another very popular and useful PFAS derivative is Gore-Tex. The process for creating it was discovered also accidentally by Bob Gore in 1969. He was conducting an experiment with heated rods of tetrafluoroethylene, and in a moment of frustration, he angrily stretched one of them. And in doing so, he discovered a completely new form of this polymer that was patented as the familiar Gore-Tex, which is greatly appreciated by all of us all-weather outdoor enthusiasts. Then came a tragedy that demanded a remedy. In 1967, during the Vietnam War, when the aircraft carrier USS Forrestal was preparing to attack, a rocket was accidentally launched from one of the F-4 Phantom jet fighters on its deck. The rocket streaked across the deck and hit a parked A-4 Skyhawk jet, which was fully fueled and waiting to take off. A horrific chain reaction of explosions and fire ensued. The Skyhawk pilot, John McCain, the future senator from Arizona, narrowly escaped with his life. However, 134 sailors were killed and many more were seriously injured. It was the worst disaster on a US Navy ship since World War II. As a result, the Navy worked with 3M to develop an aqueous film-forming foam, AFFF, to effectively fight such fires. The key ingredient was PFOA. Military and civilian firefighting units were soon using AFFF in regularly scheduled drills and letting it run off the pavement and into drains and onto the ground. It was dispensed in great quantities. In one incident, an alarm was accidentally set off that caused the foam to fill up an entire airplane hangar. When sprayed through a special nozzle, AFFF makes huge mounds of bubbly foam that's fun to play in. You can even use it to wash your cars. And Mimi had a photograph of that. Fire drills sometimes became social events. So then, PFAS compounds became critical in just about all branches of industry, and they occur in a much wider range of consumer products than anybody imagined. They float through the air, they get dumped into water bodies and onto airport runways and firehouse parking lots. They filter through the soil and get into the water we drink and the food we consume. And this is a great big long list. I don't expect you to read all of them, but if you just glance at a few of them, you get the idea. And here are some photographs and graphics illustrating. And here are stick figures of some of the very, several of the very many members of this PFAS family. It's important to note that they do not occur in nature. They are all man-made. And these cartoon portraits of PFOA and PFOS show the critical chemical structure that accounts for the useful but also perilous attributes of these substances. Either as individual molecules or linked together as giant sheets of molecules called polymers, that have one end that repels water and oil, and the other end that has a so-called reactive group. Physical and chemical forces do not ordinarily break them down, and microorganisms won't eat them. The reason for this is a strong bond between fluorine atoms and the carbon atoms in that chain. The little gray balls, and the green ones are the chlorine or the fluorine. For this reason, they outlast previous notoriously hazardous hydrocarbons that we've been carelessly releasing into the environment, like petroleum products, DDT, and PCBs. And here's the same diagram. This is very popular, that both Meleesa and Mimi showed, that just give you an idea of where they come from, all these sources, and where they go to, our drinking water. We absorb them through our skin and from our intestines. They circulate and settle in our organs. And in reading some of the research and thinking about this, the data is incomplete and sketchy. And I went to wondering about, is there something plausible about the way these things behave and look that accounts for what they do? And here it is. On the left here is DNA, and the right is human serum albumin. These PFAS substances cling to the grooves, the major and minor grooves in DNA. They attach to proteins like human serum albumin. And human serum albumin is the main multi-purpose carrier protein in our blood that transports substances that otherwise couldn't circulate to where they need to go. So these substances potentially interfere with our bodily functions and our DNA, our hormones, our enzymes, various proteins. And they linger and accumulate in our bodies. And there is accumulating evidence that they gum up our metabolic works. So what do they do? And Mimi had a slide on this, so I won't belabor this, but there are good studies behind all of these things: thyroid disease, cholesterol, and the evidence for these harmful effects is incomplete. This slide doesn't talk about the cancer effects, but there's reason to suspect that these agents cause testicular and kidney cancer in humans who are exposed at high levels. The evidence of these harmful effects is incomplete, but most of the cited research papers that I checked out are either pretty convincing on their own, or they pointed to the necessity of further investigation. Such research is obviously made more difficult by the fact that researchers have to rely on animal studies or follow people with various degrees of various types of PFAS exposure for a lifetime and compare these people with folks who are less exposed. But as one little example, you see that in the middle there about body's response to vaccines. And this study caught my attention because of the COVID. One research report stood out. It was a study of, believe it or not, children with PFAS in their blood in the Faroe Islands, which are off of the north coast of England. And that study showed that children with higher PFAS levels in their blood were significantly more likely to fail to develop protective levels of immunity from diphtheria and tetanus childhood vaccines they received. So here's the US view of a map similar to one that Mimi showed, showing military sites, drinking water, other known sites, and you see where the most dots are. And you wonder, are those the most contaminated sites, or are those the most tested sites? Because you can see it looks like certain states are on it and others are either free of contamination or maybe they're just not testing. And I'm going to skip over these because we want to get to questions, but Pease Air Force Base in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. The base went on for years. It was a critical Air Force base. There's also an adjacent Navy base. You can see in this picture the runway there, and the base was closed in 1988, and all the jobs left. So the very creative folks there came up with a wonderful idea to turn this whole thing into an international trade port. And they built and expanded the facility. But oops, it's contaminated with PFAS. All that new housing, all those new wells that were used to provide drinking water for the folks, it's got PFAS in it. And somebody asked about dairies, about milk. Well, Art Schapp in Clovis, New Mexico, right next to an Cannon Air Force Base, had his wells contaminated on his land, which contaminated his cows and their milk, and he had to throw out all of his milk. The concentration in his wells was up to 12,000 parts per trillion. And the alarm level that people are looking at, that Wisconsin is looking at, is either 70 or 20. So here we're narrowing it down to the Great Lakes area, and I'm going to speed through here because in Wisconsin, the Tyco site in Marinette, which is right, it's about halfway down the shore of Green Bay, was where this firefighting foam was produced and experimented with. And so the levels there are quite high, and the testing and cleanup proceeds to this day. But the PFAS got into the groundwater, washed into the river, washed into the lake, and then came right back to the shore as this foam. Here are just a couple of slides showing who's got it in their blood. You see, it's the workers at the factories, certain communities where PFAS things are made. And at the bottom here is the background levels. The average in folks who don't have a point source right around them of exposure. We've all got some of this in our blood, but there's a lot of difference. That's PFOA and that's PFOS. So here again are the relatively few documented PFAS contaminated sites in Wisconsin because there's less contamination, or because we're earlier in the testing process, as Mimi alluded to. Here's a picture from that Tyco fire products facility on the Menominee River in Marinette. And remember, I said that the worrisome contamination level is 70 or 20 parts per trillion. And here they had measurements up to 254,000 parts per trillion in the groundwater. So even on that national map and then the state map, there's this little blue dot out in the middle of nowhere, looks like, in Rhinelander. So what's that about? Well, PFAS was first detected in 2013 in Rhinelander's city well number 7 during monitoring required by the US EPA. It was confirmed to be present in 2019. And then subsequently in October of 2019, city well number 8 had PFAS in concentration of 90 parts per trillion. And remember that Wisconsin's recommended standard is either 70 at the highest, but probably more like 20. So those 2 wells remain shut down, which leaves 3 wells to supply the homes, businesses, and industries supplied by Rhinelander's Municipal Water Authority. So Rhinelander's mayor, Chris Frederickson, has formed a local stakeholders group to oversee the situation. The city's in the running to acquire federal infrastructure funds to help study and remedy the problem. Dr. James Tingham, director of the Geological Engineering program at the College of Engineering at UW-Madison, is serving as the city's consultant, overseeing testing and hydrologic studies. So they're testing the amount of PFAS in the water. And then this gadget here is a radar ground tester. You send radar down into the ground and you get a picture of what the subsurface soil is like, and therefore how things are likely to flow through it. And the center picture here, Tammy Baldwin visited here a week or so ago and has promised to try to help get us some funds. This is just on the right is a picture of one of the wells, one of them that's been shut down out on the grounds of the airport. So now what? Municipal home and business filtration systems using reverse osmosis and dual grade activated carbon-based filters can reduce the PFAS in water to detectable levels, but it doesn't destroy it. You have those filters that you've got to get rid of somehow. And PFAS compounds can only be incinerated at temperatures between 800 and 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. That requires extensive, sophisticated facilities, different from those built in the past to take care of Superfund sites. So the Department of Defense is funding research on this issue, and I've been following a series of webinars about that. And the state legislature, at least has in the committee level, 2 bills, SB 361 and its partner AB 419, to fund the management of PFAS, measuring it, and then giving grants to municipalities. So you can see why I chose this particular aspect of solid and hazardous waste management to bring down as a local version of the state league webinar that I moderated in August. So you can either try to ignore this or diligently pursue it and try to do something about it. And with that, I will stop, and we got a few minutes for questions.
We have a question from Sarah Olson regarding, let's see. What about PFAS in agricultural products and dairy?
Well, I had one slide that I didn't include. It shows the amount of PFAS that's detected on average in various foods. And as I recall, things like fish were pretty high, but pretty much all of our food is contaminated with perhaps very small amounts. Again, the major source of that result in high blood levels is the people that live where this stuff is being dumped from a manufacturing source, or people that actually work in the factory. But it's in our food, and it coats the fast food paper because that it has that wonderful quality of keeping the grease and water off of our clothes when we pick up our fast food hamburgers.
Are there any
Any
other
other questions?
questions from the audience? Sarah?
Yes, actually, my question was, has it been determined, Dorothy, whether exposure to PFAS is more or less, what kind of exposure to PFAS is more or less harmful? I mean, is there a difference if you breathe it versus if you ingest it? Or is there no difference? Is it the same?
It seems to get in by most any route of skin or breathing or ingestion. And the exact details of its the relative ease with which it passes into your body by those various means, I didn't see particulars on that.
Okay.
There is all kinds of research going on. It was mind-boggling to try to wade through it and winnow it down to tell you all something that useful.
Sure.
And Maggie Cush had a question. Would you share your PowerPoint with us?
I'll share my PowerPoint with anybody, but I would mention also that this recording is going to be up on the League of Women Voters of the Northwoods YouTube channel, and that would make sure that you get the benefit of all three speakers rather than just my slides. Otherwise, it's a matter of asking Meleesa and Mimi separately to share their slide decks.
And Sarah Olson, has it been determined which method of exposure to PFAS is more or less harmful? By air, by water, or is there no difference?
Yeah, that was the one I just
Oh, okay.
equivocated about.
Dorothy,
Okay.
this is Tom Giroux. Nothing.
Try again, Stephen. Your internet connection is a little weak.
This is actually Tom on Stephen's phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. I wanted to comment that, at least so far, the most efficient delivery method for PFAS is through your drinking water, simply because you drink a lot of water in a given day. And as everybody covered in their presentations, it accumulates and never leaves your body. The other thing, and you mentioned this, Dorothy, is in your food. And it, like PCBs and dioxin and a number of other chemicals, it bioaccumulates. So a small insect, aquatic insect ingests some PFAS, then a fish eats it, and then a bigger fish eats it, and then a human eats it. At each step, the concentration of the PFAS bioaccumulates. And that's why a lot of our Native American communities are concerned because they rely on fish as a food source. So just a couple comments.
Yeah, I read a little story about there's a community of Burmese refugees in Milwaukee. These are part of the Rohingya minority that have escaped here as refugees, and it's their custom to fish in the local rivers and stream and the lakes and waters and stuff, and so they still do that when they came to Milwaukee, and their blood levels of PFAS are higher than other folks in Milwaukee. So that's just a little anecdotal suspicious thing to illustrate what you just said, Tom.
Here's another question. Will the League of Women Voters of Wisconsin be advocating again on the bills in the Wisconsin Assembly and Senate?
You bet we will. Just this coming Friday is the monthly meeting of the Legislative Committee of the State League, and we have some excellent members who bird dog the bills related to natural resources, and they focus particularly on this one. As I said, it's SB 361, AB 419. It has a lot of provisions, but those provisions are very nicely explained in the text of the bill if anybody wants to look it up.
Okay, another question. Does well water testing show the amount of PFAS?
It sure does. And there comes the dilemma. I live about 3 miles from the airport. A lot of people live closer to the airport, and it's the wells near the Winelander Airport that are PFAS contaminated. And so all of us who have private wells, the dilemma is, do we test or not? Do we really want to know? Do we want to pay for it? Do we want to wait till the DNR offers to pay for it, or the Department of Health Services? Or do we just want to not find out because of what it might do to our property values? So there's the personal ethical dilemma. And that's right now, that's something personally for people just to decide, knowing that we do not have extensive, detailed last word evidence about just what levels are how harmful over what period of time. But remembering that these things exert their effects, or bioaccumulating effects over a lifetime.
How do you go about getting your well tested?
The best thing to do on testing for PFAS and other substances in private wells, something that we should all be doing regularly, is to call the health department. So the Oneida County Health Department would be the place to call, and they either have the testing or can give advice about who does it, how much it costs, what the collection procedure is.
Any other questions? You can unmute and ask your question.
It looks like everybody's absorbed all they can. No pun intended, sorry.
Dorothy, I did have one thing I wanted to mention about sampling. The sanitarian usually does that for the health department. The position's currently vacant, but they probably have some other staff that can direct you. And we do have a wonderful lab in Crandon called Northern Lake Services. And they're one of the only private laboratories that are certified to do PFAS testing. So that's right nearby, and they might be able to help you out with a sample kit and directions. It is pretty specific sampling procedures for doing it. So, you know, if you're really serious, I think you would want to wait till the county has hired a sanitarian and can help you with that. The cost is about $300.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And so thanks to our guest speakers, Meleesa Johnson and Mimi Johnson, and to our attentive audience. We invite you all to join the League of Women Voters of the Northwoods as members and or to attend any future monthly meeting programs. We always have a good quality as program. Our next virtual program is scheduled for the 4th of October at 1 p.m. We always have a dilemma about what days and times to schedule these because nothing is convenient for everybody. But the next program will be given in conjunction with the local chapter of the American Association of University Women, and the speaker will be Lisa Theo, a program coordinator in the geoscience department at UW-Madison. She'll be speaking on STEM education, that's technology, science, engineering, and math in underrepresented groups. Registration information will be coming out in about 2 weeks. So thanks very much, everybody. I'll say good evening.
Thank you,
take care.
Dorothy.
Thank you, Dorothy.